The Baltimore Ravens have had one of the most talented rosters in football for years. Yet somehow the same thing keeps happening. Games they should have won slip away. Fourth quarter leads disappeared. And whenever the pressure was highest, the Ravens seemed to become a completely different football team. Most people blame the players or the coordinators, but there's one problem with those explanations. The players changed, the coordinators changed, but the fourth quarter collapses kept happening. Which raises a bigger question. What if the problem was never the players at all? What if the problem started at the very top? Because this offseason, the Ravens made a decision that could completely change the reputation of this franchise. They moved on from John Harbaugh and handed the team to Jesse Minter. And if Minter can fix the issue that has haunted Baltimore for years, the Ravens may finally have a real shot at a Super Bowl. Since 2020, the Ravens have lost 13 games after leading by 10 or more points. The easiest explanation has always been to blame the roster or the defensive coordinator. But that never really made sense. The Ravens have consistently ranked among the league's most talented teams. They've had Lamar Jackson, they've invested heavily on defense, they've had quality offensive lines, deep secondaries, and impact pass rushers. Everything a championship roster could ask for. Talent has never been the issue for this team. The issue has been decision-making and execution in critical moments. That's why I believe this goes beyond scheme. Scheme doesn't explain why the same mistakes keep happening across multiple rosters and multiple coordinators. Eventually, those mistakes become a reflection of the standards being set inside the building. When games tighten up in the fourth quarter, Baltimore has repeatedly played their worst. In Week 10 of the 2023 season, Baltimore built a 14-point lead against Cleveland. They controlled most of the game. Then the mistakes started. The defense allowed explosive plays, Baltimore failed to finish tackles, Lamar Jackson threw a costly pick six. Suddenly, Cleveland had life. They stormed back and stole a game Baltimore should have won. That's why I don't think this is primarily a player or a scheme problem, because through hundreds of different players, dozens of different opponents, and 3 different coordinators, the same issue keeps reappearing. The one constant throughout all of it has been John Harbaugh. And maybe the most telling statistic is this. In franchise history, the Ravens have blown 39 games after leading by double digits. 28 of those came with Harbaugh as the head coach. And when a problem survives multiple roster cycles and coaching staffs, eventually you have to look at the culture being created at the top. And the consequences have been enormous. Baltimore has repeatedly entered fourth quarters with leads only to watch opponents climb back into contests. A perfect example, Week 1 against the Bills. The Ravens had a 15-point lead in the fourth. Then, the defense gave up 3 touchdowns in 1 quarter. A game that looked completely under control suddenly became a collapse. That's how costly these collapses can become. Sometimes the leads are small, like Week 13 of the 2021 season against the Steelers. Sometimes they were double digits, like Week 2 of the 2024 season against the Raiders. But the truly frustrating part is that these collapses often happen despite Baltimore being the better team. Look at Week 18 against the Steelers. The Steelers were shorthanded because of injuries. The Ravens were clearly the better team and needed a win to make the playoffs. But even with everything on the line, they couldn't finish. The Ravens didn't lose because they lacked talent, they lost because they failed to execute when pressure was highest. And when those failures continue for multiple seasons, they become part of a team's identity. Fair or not, the Ravens have developed a reputation as a team that could dominate for 3 quarters, but couldn't always finish the job. That's why this offseason feels different. Because Baltimore didn't just make cosmetic changes, right? They attacked the areas that have contributed to these fourth quarter failures. The biggest move was replacing John Harbaugh with Jesse Minter. Minter has built a reputation for disciplined, physical football. At Michigan, Minter coordinated one of the most disciplined defenses in the country. His units consistently ranked among the nation's best in scoring defense while rarely beating themselves with blown assignments or communication errors. The defense always flew to the football and finished plays with physicality. And that's important because the Ravens' biggest issue hasn't been talent, it's been execution. And if the Ravens truly had a culture problem, that's exactly the kind of coach you'd want leading the reset. The question is whether changing the head coach is enough to finally change what happens in the fourth quarter. Baltimore didn't just stop there though. They also added Trey Hendrickson. And that's significant because Hendrickson gives them something they haven't had since Terrell Suggs was there. A true closer. Since 2021, Hendrickson ranks 2nd in the NFL in fourth quarter sacks. That's exactly the type of player Baltimore has been missing. Because too often the Ravens have given opposing quarterbacks one final chance to tie or win the game. When games enter the fourth quarter and opposing offenses are forced into obvious passing situations, Hendrickson specializes in ending drives. He doesn't just generate pressure, He creates sacks, he forces mistakes, he finishes plays. And those are often the difference between protecting a lead and watching one disappear. This is where the Ravens could finally start turning those fourth quarter losses into wins. Because, on paper, Baltimore addressed nearly every issue that kept showing up during those collapses. Minter's biggest impact may not show up on a stat sheet. It may show up in better situational play calling, more physicality, better communication, and better execution in critical moments. The things that often determine whether a team closes out games or not. Meanwhile, Hendrickson provides the finishing punch. There are a few things more valuable than a pass rusher who can end a game with one play. A drive-killing sack, a strip fumble, a pressure that forces an interception. These moments can make a comeback feel impossible. And that's exactly what Baltimore has been missing. Too many times, the Ravens have allowed opponents one final opportunity. Hendrickson gives them a much better chance of making sure that opportunity never materializes. Ultimately, I do think Jesse Minter is a major upgrade. Not because he's guaranteed to be a better coach than John Harbaugh in every area, but because he directly addresses the Ravens' biggest weakness. Will it work? Nobody knows yet. But they're betting that a new voice, a new standard, and a new defensive identity can finally change that. Minter hasn't coached a game as Baltimore's head coach. Hendrickson hasn't recorded a sack for the Ravens, and fourth quarter reputations aren't erased overnight. But for the first time in years, Baltimore attacked what appears to be the root of the problem instead of the symptoms. If the Ravens truly had a culture issue, Minter may be exactly the coach they needed. And if he can reset the culture, the Ravens won't just solve their fourth quarter problem. They might finally become the Super Bowl team that their talent has suggested they've been all along. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Emmett Swart from the RFL Show, and I'll see you in the next video.